respond very briefly from here, and I'll hand over to you, and then we will open it up. So, I think when you say, you're right, the only way to go to the universal is via the concrete. But I think we have to recognize that this move from the concrete to the universal is simultaneously being made by multiple different actors in different ways that are not equally placed in power. So I think we have to be more aware of the fact that you said rights have to be universal. In language, yes. But multiple universes of rights coexist in competition with each other. That's what the political scientists in Menon call diverse discourses of rights at war. You can imagine it in a simple way as the Sunday Ramayana cartoon, right? The arrow comes from the left and the arrow comes from the right, and one has the green squiggly things and the other has the pink things, and one of them disappears. Now, what's happening constantly in our battles in the courts is that diverse discourses of rights are meeting like those arrows, and they're loaded differently. So, the Bombay-based sociologist Rita Fernandez said it's more accurate to speak of the right to lifestyle than the right to life, given the claims that are being made. You're seeing arguments here. So, part of what I'm saying here is, when we think about this universal character, we have to start thinking about it. So here now I'm sort of beginning to take your side, so we can move forward together also. That's because we can set this up only for so long. So to also think about, so I'm asking myself here are these diverse contestations of rights. Here is the contemporary Indian city, which on most days makes you feel like most of the claims to rights are being made by those who already possess power. Okay? So I'm reminded of Ranciere's very provocative quote when he said once, rights are like the old clothes that you give away to, like we give old clothes away to charity. It's when rights have no use that they are given to the poor. Okay? And I think that there's something really powerful about that. Like, we have emptied this container, so you may have it as your symbolic granting of the dream endlessly deferred. So, I think then you shift out. What is the basis of these universal claims? Historically, rights have either been claimed on need, I am poor, therefore you must care of me. Right? That requires a welfare state that will acknowledge to be the subject of those claims. Rights can be based on contribution. I pay my taxes, so I have a right to this. I build this house, so I have a right to this. I work, so I have a right to this. Rights can be based on some notion of merit, by which I don't mean like, 90%. I mean like, I'm a special category X, Y, and Z gender, either because of vulnerability or because of exceptional performance, either way. To me, where we are right now, the claim from need has weakened. The claims of contribution and merit are the only game in town. What does the city allow you to say, to make claims on the basis of contribution and merit? What I like about the right to the city is that it allows you to say, I built this city. With all due respect, architects did not build the city. Okay? People built the city. Indian cities are auto-constructed. Our built form is built by local contractors, local builders, and households. A tiny percentage of our cities is institutionally built. That house is depending on how many people it has, not a tiny percentage of the form, but in terms of the percentage of what that form houses. So this word, this idea of auto-construction is very powerful to me. Because auto-constructed cities have different political spaces. They require a different kind of collective life. Because you can't auto-construct a basti on occupied land alone. You must do it in some haunting echo of collective consumption. So there is a politics in the way our cities have been built that to me has the DNA of an effective articulation to the right to the city. If you begin and say, I don't want you to give me this right, I want you to understand that I have always exercised this right in practice but not in name. And there to me, there's an example by Ranciere. I read him in the auto this morning, which is the only reason why the things are in my head. That about the French Revolution, where in the revolution they said women cannot be revolutionaries. And a very famous feminist response was, if we can be hung at the gallows, we're already on the stage. And what is that claim? That claim is, if I can be killed for being a revolutionary, I have already performed the rights you say I don't have. Right? And that to me is the core of rethinking this situation, of putting our thoughts together. That if you begin and say, let's talk about rights on the basis of contribution, and you tell me who built the housing that houses the residents of Bombay, and you give rights on the basis of that contribution, not value but contribution. So there is an argument to be made there, but it must be an argument to say that we already possess these rights except in name. Okay? It's very similar to the argument of the Basti. We already occupy this land except in title. So I think that allows me, a move to a game which I do believe we kind of have to play, because whether we like it or not, the city has arrived as a relevant political terrain of debate. Between smart city and sustainable city and cities of engines of growth, and everyone touting to you that the future is urban and the global future is Asian urbanism, and Asian urbanism is driven by Indian urbanism, and that cities produce 65% of GDP, etc., etc., it has come. It's not going anywhere. So in some sense, and this is where I am actually very compelled by your idea of contractual and non-contractual rights, because I think it's a formulation that reminds us that a non-operationalizable right to the city still has tremendous value if it configures the meaning of the city itself and allows other claims to be more effective. So you may still ask for the right to housing, but you're doing it in a broader imagination of what the city is meant to be and who it is meant to belong to. Right? So if you rework smart city and challenge smart city to a right to a city articulation, to unhook its imagination of urban development, then the existing battles of the right to work and right to shelter become stronger without making those claims. That's the workaround that I'm partly seeing. So if you look at the non-contractual rights, I see that. But then I remain skeptical then of the right to the city becoming a basis for the operational organization of everyday political practice. Then to me, it gives you something on that non-contractual space to configure the end goal and end space, but it does not give you a way to decide how to act strategically to move towards that vanishing horizon. And I think I'm still unsettled. I can't imagine, and I say this as someone who is a part of and advising a Right to the City campaign that just got launched. And so these questions are, they're not, to use the worst meaning of the word academic, they're not, I'm not going to use it, they're not redundant. They are very much academic, they're not redundant. To me, these are very real questions of how those of us who have spent as many moments in front of bulldozers as in classrooms to decide what the hell to do. And what the hell to do in a space where it really feels sometimes that we are slipping down a very, very bad slope in the opposite direction. I mean, I have seen 10 years of relentless evictions in Delhi which made you feel every day like you just didn't have a clue of how to fight. That the slogans didn't work and the tactics didn't work and something shifted around you and you didn't notice. The city changed, the meaning of the city changed for us in the last 25 years. So somewhere or the other, if the right to the city can even bring us back into saying we can't cede the meaning of the urban and the city and its politics to these imaginations of 65% GDP contribution, without losing the idea that cities must be economically productive. Let me also say this, because it is too easy. It is too easy to kill smart cities and manufacturing cities and productive cities and say, no, we don't mean that. But cities are economic entities at all scales, including big capital and informal work. And pitting one against the other is not the answer. Trying to unsettle the hegemony of one over the other may be the answer. So the last thing I'll say then is, I hope that the debates that the Right to the City pushes us towards centrally take on three things. One is that it makes us rethink the narrative we have of the production of urban space. That we really begin seriously in our policy frameworks in our everyday life to actually pay attention to the way our cities are built, to recognize they were not built through planning or by architecture, but actually auto-constructed, which means they require an utterly different political imagination. Two, that we use the right to the city as I think it is most effectively being used, say through the question of thinking about gender in the city, to imagine what it would do to expand the life world of diverse urban residents. By which I really mean, what are you able to aspire to living in a city? as whoever you are. That space of that part of the right to the city, I think, is critical. It's critical to hold on and say a city in which our life worlds of aspirations are as broad as possible will also be more egalitarian, will also be more efficient, will also be more effective, will also be more smart. And the last thing is to imagine in governance and political process a claim that allows us more control over the conditions in which we live. Now, whether you think about that through participatory governance or whether you think about that as resistance and protest, what political practice to shape the conditions in which you live. I think that the right to city can open up these debates. I'm not convinced that it should be the way we work within them to get where we want. But I do believe that it could pave the way more clearly to where we should end up.
Let me make a caveat right at the beginning. This is a debate which really has no one single outcome. And I'd like to actually open it up for everyone else to participate in it as I finish. Right to the city as a political imagination, as something which can anchor, as something which can give the contours of what those political practices should be. What are the battles which are worth fighting? Right? Because there are all kinds of battles that can be fought in this city. As a system which allows you to determine what are the fights which are worth fighting at any given time. Where should they be fought? As a framework that gives you some way of thinking about these things, arriving at some kind of answers, is something which I find very, very productive. And I say this because, to me, a contestatory claim is always in excess of what the statute gives you. The statute may give you 250 square feet, but your contestatory claim is way more than that. You take that, but you fight for something much bigger than that. Now, the problem, as with many other things that are going on in our cities,